As my heir, William now assumes the Scottish titles which have meant so much to me. He succeeds me as Duke of Cornwall and takes on the responsibilities for the Duchy of Cornwall.
When the doors of the palace opened, the world expected tradition, restraint, and symbolism. Instead, history bent. William and Catherine stepped forward, not as heirs in waiting, but as figures carrying the weight of the crown, their presence charged with authority and finality. Every movement felt deliberate, every smile laden with meaning as power was rearranged before the cameras. Royal insiders watched in silence as assumptions collapsed. So was this appearance merely ceremonial or the clearest signal yet that a new reign has begun? A ceremony meant to reassure the crown. Soft morning light streamed through the colored glass of Westminster Abbey, settling quietly on stone that had witnessed centuries of power, promise, and uncertainty. What unfolded there was presented as a blessing service, but those watching closely understood it was something far more deliberate. By early 2025, the palace faced growing pressure to project steadiness after months of speculation surrounding King Charles' health. Speculation that had followed him relentlessly since his coronation in May 2023. This gathering was designed to speak without words. The crown remained steady and its future was already prepared. At the heart of that message stood Prince William and Catherine, figures carefully framed as the monarchy's next anchor. William appeared composed to the point of distance, the restless edge of his younger years long replaced by a controlled stillness shaped by decades of expectation. He had learned patience under Queen Elizabeth II and discipline under his father. And now he carried himself like a man fully aware of what awaited him. Catherine beside him commanded the room with quiet authority. Her return to public life following health challenges in 2024 had transformed her image. She no longer projected gentle reserve alone but resolved. Every movement, every detail of her appearance communicated reassurance and endurance. Behind the polished surface, however, tension lingered. In private spaces from Windsor Castle to Buckingham Palace, conversations about succession had become less theoretical. The service itself, officially framed as continuity, was meant to quiet those discussions. Yet symbols have power, and even silence can speak. As senior officials settled into their seats, and the ceremonial music echoed through the abbey, attention shifted to a space that remained conspicuously unfilled. Queen Camilla, scheduled to enter alongside the king as a sign of unity, had not appeared. The absence was subtle, but unmistakable. For an institution built on precision, such a deviation carried weight. Camilla's journey from outsider to consort had been long and hard-earned, but it had also reshaped family dynamics, particularly with William. Since the passing of Queen Elizabeth II in 2022, Camilla has asserted a clearer sense of authority, determined to define her role rather than fade into it. William sensed the disruption immediately, his reaction was contained but telling. Catherine adjusted instinctively, her presence expanding to steady the visual balance. To those familiar with palace undercurrents, the empty chair suggested more than a delay. It reflected unresolved struggles over influence and visibility within a modernizing monarchy. The abbey remained calm, almost reverent. Yet the moment exposed what carefully planned ceremonies often conceal. The crown was projecting certainty, but inside its walls, power was still being negotiated. What was meant to reassure the public instead revealed how fragile symbolism can be when unity falters, even for a moment. But when unity quietly fractured, what subtle act inside Westminster Abbey revealed just how fragile power and symbolism truly are. A ceremony that refused to obey. A quiet act of defiance hung in the air of Westminster Abbey, subtle enough to escape the cameras, but heavy enough to unsettle those who understood power. The media's fixation on William and Catherine had shaped every expectation for that day, and the ceremony was meant to confirm a future already accepted by the public. In early spring, beneath stone arches that had witnessed centuries of order, the monarchy gathered to present unity. Yet unity proved fragile when the bells began to toll. Their deep notes rolling through the nave like a warning no one wanted to hear. Long before the disruption became visible, it was felt. Advisors had spent months refining every movement, every pause, every breath of the service. The red carpet was not just fabric but a boundary, separating roles carefully agreed upon behind closed doors. King Charles stood composed, his attention fixed forward, knowing this moment was meant to elevate his son and daughter-in-law before both God and nation. The atmosphere demanded stillness, reverence, and submission to tradition. Then a sharp, uninvited sound echoed from the far end of the abbey. The great wooden doors swung open with urgent force, shattering the illusion of control. Heads turned before permission could be granted. A lone figure advanced, determined, unmoved by the shock rippling across the pews. This was no symbolic entrance planned in the order of service. It was a declaration. The ceremony slipped from script into uncertainty. Camilla's heels struck marble too quickly, too loudly, carrying an insistence that cut through the fading choir. Ignoring the discreet route prepared for her, she crossed the central path, breaching the invisible line protecting the Prince and Princess of Wales. Faces stiffened. Clergy hesitated. No one intervened, unprepared for such defiance. As she drew closer to the sanctuary, the air tightened. William stood unmoving, his posture flawless, the discipline of duty holding him in place. Only the tightening of his jaw hinted at the strain beneath the surface. Catherine noticed everything. She sensed the uneven breathing beside her, the subtle effort to edge forward, the attempt to reclaim space and attention. When Camilla shifted to interrupt the camera's view, Catherine responded with nothing more than a brief, precise glance. It was enough. What followed unsettled even the most seasoned observers. As the Archbishop prepared the invocation, Camilla reached toward the sacred objects, overstepping a line reserved only for the sovereign and his heir. Her words to the nearby clergy were low, urgent, and unseen by the public. Yet their effect was immediate. The rhythm of the service fractured. Silence fell where prayer should have continued. In a place defined by continuity, the moment exposed something raw and unresolved. Beneath the gold, the robes, and the ancient stone, a struggle unfolded, not for ceremony, but for relevance. By the time the service resumed, everyone understood that something irreversible had occurred. The abbey would stand as it always had. But the balance within the monarchy had shifted quietly, unmistakably, and in full view of history. Could the monarchy's quiet shift be hiding something deeper? As the unnatural stillness inside Westminster Abbey hints at secrets waiting to unfold, the silence that rewrote the crown. The stillness inside Westminster Abbey was so complete it felt unnatural, as though time itself had been instructed to wait. Long before anyone fully understood what was unfolding, tradition faltered under the weight of something unscripted. Clergy who had spent their lives rehearsing ceremony by memory stood unmoving, caught between instinct and disbelief. Even the ancient stones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps seemed to hold their breath as the ritual slipped off its careful path. Hidden lenses caught what protocol usually shields. Tightened jaws, startled glances, hands clasped too firmly. Among the assembled royals, confusion spread quietly but visibly. This was not merely a disruption. It was a fracture opening in the heart of a sacred moment. What was meant to signal unity now exposed strain, and one figure seeking affirmation in the spotlight had misjudged the rhythm entirely. The harmony demanded by the setting had no room for improvisation. King Charles III saw more than the pause. He read the room with the sharp awareness of a man who had waited decades for this role. The fatigue that once followed him through public appearances in early 2023 had disappeared. In its place stood a ruler fully present, alert to consequences. He noticed his son's uncertainty, the quiet composure of his daughter-in-law, and the unmistakable loss of control in the woman beside him. This moment, heavy and humiliating, was not isolated. It was the echo of earlier warnings, smaller missteps that had been ignored or forgiven. Silence stretched until it became unbearable. Wind whispered through the high windows, carrying the faint sound of the city beyond the abbey walls. Cameras recorded everything, preserving expressions that history would later dissect. This was the kind of pause that forces decisions, the kind leaders either shrink from or step into. When the king moved, it was neither rushed nor dramatic. His shoes struck the stone floor with deliberate certainty as he advanced toward the sanctuary, each step carrying meaning. The clergy remained frozen, like pieces left behind on a board where the game had suddenly changed. He did not look sideways. His gaze stayed forward, fixed on the light filtering through stained glass, as if drawing strength from centuries of continuity, even as he prepared to reshape it. The crown he reached for was not the one that dazzles in portraits. It was smaller, symbolic, heavy with promise rather than display. In lifting it, Charles was not correcting a momentary error. He was asserting control over a narrative that threatened to unravel. The disruption meant to secure status had instead provided justification for a long-considered shift, a careful adjustment disguised as ceremony. What unfolded next would be discussed in hushed tones long after the abbey emptied across Britain and far beyond London. In that suspended instant, power quietly changed shape. Tradition survived, but not untouched. And as the ritual resumed, it did so under a new understanding. Even in places ruled by history, authority still belongs to those willing to act when silence becomes too loud to ignore. So when silence spoke louder than words, what shocking moment unfolded beneath Westminster Abbey's arches, where every glint of gold hinted at a historic shift? The moment authority changed hands. The precious metal caught the light in a way that silenced the vast hall. Its glow sharp and unforgiving, reflecting not ceremony, but resolve. Beneath the high arches of Westminster Abbey, history shifted without announcement. The king's mantle stirred as he moved with purpose, ignoring the carefully scripted sequence designed months earlier by aides and officials. What followed was not written into any program. Yet it carried more weight than any rehearsed declaration. King Charles did not wait for instruction or signal. He advanced on his own terms. The symbolic crown held firmly in his grasp, turning the ancient ritual into something deeply personal. In that instant, the ceremony ceased to be about tradition alone. It became an unmistakable statement of intent. The silence that spread through the abbey was heavy, pressing against the walls as thousands sensed something irreversible unfolding. William remained still, aware that every movement would echo beyond the moment. His posture spoke of readiness rather than hesitation. A man long prepared for a destiny that once felt distant. Catherine stood beside him, composed yet alert, fully understanding the meaning laid into the king's deliberate approach. This was not a symbolic theater. It was recognition granted openly and without apology, confirming her role as a central pillar of the monarchy's future. The king's hand showed the marks of age. Yet, when the crown was raised between them, it steadied with surprising strength. That quiet gesture carried the force of generations. No anthem followed. No voice broke the stillness. The power of the moment came from restraint, from the deliberate absence of spectacle. 3 lives bound by duty and blood intersected in a way that reshaped the balance of influence within the royal family. Across the aisle, Camilla stood frozen. The positioning was impossible to miss. The act unfolded directly before her, stripping away any illusion of shared command. In that instant, years of careful maneuvering dissolved. The message was clear. Authority did not drift or negotiate. It was claimed and confirmed. The air seemed thinner where she stood, the weight of exclusion settling visibly across her expression. What had been framed publicly as reassurance about the monarch's stability transformed into something far greater. Observers later spoke of that day as a turning point, a quiet declaration that the future had already been secured. The setting, the timing, even the restraint were deliberate. London had not witnessed such a decisive transfer of moral authority in decades. As the ceremony moved forward, its original purpose felt distant. William and Catherine stood changed, carrying a presence that required no validation. The abbey, steeped in centuries of coronations and vows, bore witness once more to the monarchy's ability to evolve without breaking. Long after the final prayers faded, one truth remained unmistakable. The center of gravity had shifted, and the path ahead had been unmistakably marked by the king himself. What secrets did the king's carefully marked path hide? And how would the closed gates of Buckingham Palace change everything behind the royal walls? The day the palace lines were redrawn. The gates of Buckingham Palace closed behind the royal convoy, sealing in more than just the echoes of cheering crowds. Inside the palace walls, a weight settled that could not be waved away by ceremony or tradition. Only hours earlier at Westminster Abbey, a moment meant to reassure the world in 2023 had fractured something fragile. What unfolded there lingered sharply in King Charles's thoughts, following him down polished corridors and into the heart of the palace itself. When the king withdrew to his private office, there was no gentle easing out of pageantry. The silence that followed was heavy, deliberate, and final. Camilla stood opposite him, still carrying the urgency of the abbey, but the familiar comfort between them had vanished. What remained was a ruler confronting what he believed to be a serious breach, not just of protocol, but of trust. To Charles, the incident was not personal drama. It was a public wound inflicted at the very place where continuity was meant to be sacred. Rather than raise his voice, the king chose precision. He saw the events at Westminster as a threat to the monarchy's image at a time when stability mattered most. Memories of his late mother's careful discipline and decades of restraint guided his response. With calm resolve, he reached for schedules already mapped months ahead. Trooping the color, diplomatic visits, and overseas tours planned to reinforce unity. One by one, changes were made, names were crossed out, roles reassigned, each decision landed with quiet authority. Orders moved swiftly through private secretaries and senior aides. By the end of that afternoon, Camilla's public presence had been drastically reduced. Balcony appearances were limited. State receptions adjusted. Her title remained, but the influence attached to it was sharply narrowed. It was not a public dismissal, but something colder. A controlled distancing that sent a clear message throughout the palace. Elsewhere in the building, Prince William and Catherine were called in, not as observers, but as anchors. The tone shifted when the king addressed his son. Responsibility was no longer theoretical. From that point forward, the Prince and Princess of Wales were to lead the coordination of key royal appearances and public messaging. The future face of the monarchy was being brought forward deliberately, centered on clarity and reassurance. By evening, the palace was already adapting. Staff quietly updated documents. New schedules circulated. Whispers traveled through offices and corridors as long-standing expectations were rewritten in real time. The balance of visibility had changed and everyone felt it. What the public never saw was the speed of it all. The way tradition bent without breaking, guided by a king determined to protect the institution above personal loyalty. In a single day, shaped by events at Westminster Abbey and sealed behind the walls of Buckingham Palace, the monarchy's internal order was reshaped, not through spectacle, but through firm, unmistakable control. And when the palace fell into that deliberate hush, what hidden power moves were quietly reshaping the monarchy behind the scenes? When the crown quietly changed hands, the hush that settled over the palace halls felt deliberate, almost rehearsed, as if the building itself understood that something permanent had shifted. After the Westminster Abbey ceremony in early 2024, the monarchy didn't spiral into confusion. Instead, it moved with a calm urgency, like a system correcting its course. Orders flowed swiftly. Doors opened and closed without fuss. And long-standing routines were quietly rewritten. Power was not announced. It was redirected. And its new direction pointed firmly toward Kensington Palace. Within days, William's working rooms became unusually busy. Papers that once traveled through several layers of approval now reached him first. Security briefings, diplomatic updates, and media forecasts arriving before dawn. This was no rehearsal for a future role. It was an authority in real time. William approached the responsibility with a sharp focus shaped by discipline and preparation. Meetings were shorter, decisions clearer, and delays no longer tolerated. Those around him sensed it immediately. The waiting period was over. Alongside him, Catherine reshaped the monarchy's outward face. She stepped beyond ceremony and symbolism, taking an active role in shaping how the institution spoke to the public. Strategy sessions replaced surface-level planning. Every appearance, every gesture carried intention. She brought warmth without softness, simplicity without lowering standards. In a moment when uncertainty could have weakened public trust, Catherine offered steadiness. Her presence became a quiet reassurance that the crown was secure, human, and still relevant. Elsewhere, the atmosphere was strikingly different. At Clarence House, Camilla's world narrowed. Her name appeared less often on schedules. Invitations that once felt automatic became rare or carefully limited. By mid-2024, her absence from major state events was no longer subtle. It was understood. Retreat replaced routine and isolation followed. What she lost went beyond visibility. It was influence, closeness, and the unspoken confidence that once defined her place beside the king. King Charles, meanwhile, acted with a clarity that surprised even his critics. Rather than allowing personal loyalty to blur judgment, he chose restraint. His focus turned sharply toward continuity and protection of the crown's future. Observers described it as a sacrifice, a decision to place the institution above sentiment. By quietly empowering his son and daughter-in-law, Charles stabilized a monarchy that had endured years of strain. Public reaction followed quickly. Polls conducted in London and beyond reflected renewed confidence. A nation tired of internal conflict and public missteps responded to firmness and unity. Media coverage shifted tone. Instead of dwelling on division, attention moved toward a functional partnership, Charles providing authority, William offering leadership, and Catherine shaping connection. Commentators called it a reset, even a revival. What unfolded was not dramatic in the traditional sense. There were no speeches announcing change, no formal declarations of loss or gain. Yet the transformation was unmistakable. By the time summer arrived, the monarchy was operating on a new rhythm. Some figures stepped forward, others faded back, and the crown continued, quietly altered, carefully guarded, and firmly aligned with the future already taking shape. But as the palace quietly reshaped itself, what unexpected changes were stirring behind closed doors? A quiet crown, a new command. A subtle but decisive shift swept through the royal household, changing its rhythm long before the public fully sensed it. Desks moved, advisors rotated out, and familiar faces quietly disappeared from palace corridors. Those who had once gravitated toward Camilla's influence found themselves replaced by younger, sharper minds, aligned with Prince William and Princess Catherine. It was not announced, debated, or defended. It simply happened, step by calculated step, until a different atmosphere settled over the institution. Months earlier, within the stone walls of Westminster Abbey, a moment meant to project unity had instead exposed fault lines few could ignore. By late 2023, that ceremony had become more than a public event. It hardened into a reference point whispered about in royal circles. The Abbey itself, after briefly absorbing tension and misjudgment, returned to its familiar stillness. Yet this calm carried weight. It marked the acceptance of a new direction shaped by conflict rather than tradition alone. Behind the scenes, power expressed itself through detail. Seating plans subtly favored the Prince and Princess of Wales. Speaking orders placed them front and center. Patronages once considered symbolic were reassigned with intent. None of it felt rushed. Like a strong current beneath still water, the transition reshaped everything without noise. William and Catherine did not declare authority. They demonstrated it, allowing consistency and clarity to speak on their behalf. By early 2024, the palace no longer felt divided. King Charles, once burdened by the strain of balancing affection with duty, appeared visibly lighter. Observers noted a calm that had eluded him for years. The choice made within the abbey had resolved an inner struggle. With the future secured, he no longer needed to manage competing loyalties. The crown's symbolic weight had shifted, easing his own. What mattered most to the king was no longer the length of his reign, but its outcome. Ensuring stability became his quiet triumph. In William, he saw more than a son. He saw continuity forged under pressure. Someone shaped by moments when the monarchy itself felt fragile. Their shared understanding, born during times of internal strain, created a trust deeper than tradition. Catherine's role proved just as critical. Her steady presence and disciplined approach reinforced the sense that the future was already taking form. Together, the Waleses represented something carefully prepared rather than abruptly claimed. Their influence extended beyond appearances, guiding decisions that align the institution with a longer vision. Time passed, but the significance of those changes did not fade. What emerged was not a dramatic overthrow, but a recalibration. The monarchy adjusted its center of gravity, settling into a structure designed for endurance. Without spectacle or declaration, a new command took hold, reshaping the dynasty's path and ensuring that when the next chapter fully arrives, it will do so with certainty rather than doubt. So, how did William and Catherine's quiet confidence command attention without a word, leaving the world watching in awe? When the crown quietly changed hands, authority did not arrive with trumpets or formal announcements. It settled into the room through posture, silence, and certainty. William and Catherine moved through public life with a calm that felt earned rather than rehearsed, as though the weight of the crown had already found its natural place. By the early 2020s, their appearances were no longer symbolic gestures of preparation. They carried consequences. Each engagement hinted that power was no longer waiting in the wings, but operating in full view, steady, and assured. Long before Westminster Abbey absorbed the gaze of the world, the shift was already underway. William's presence had sharpened. He listened more than he spoke. Yet, when decisions were made, they landed with precision. Those closest to the institution noticed it first. He was not merely supporting the king. He was translating vision into action, shaping a modern monarchy through quiet discipline. Catherine matched that strength with a different force altogether. Her influence did not rely on command, but on clarity. She directed initiatives, redefined public expectations, and embodied a confidence that required no explanation. Together, they projected unity that felt immovable, not staged. Public trust followed naturally. Crowds no longer watched out of habit, but with belief. The monarchy, long accused of drifting, suddenly appeared anchored again. In contrast, another figure began to fade from relevance. Camilla's role diminished, not through official decree, but through absence. Her visibility thinned, her influence narrowed until Clarence House became less a residence and more a quiet holding space. Corridors once busy with purpose grew still. Attempts to assert relevance after the Abbey ceremony only deepened the divide, turning ambition into isolation. That ceremony, held in London and framed as reassurance during concerns over the king's health, became something else entirely. It was meant to calm nerves. Instead, it clarified reality. The carefully planned order unraveled, and from that unraveling emerged a truth few could deny. Power had already moved. What unfolded beneath the ancient vaults was not chaos, but correction. Succession stopped being an abstract future and revealed itself as a present condition. As evening settled over the Tempames, the abbey stood unchanged in stone, but altered in meaning. When King Charles stepped forward with the crown, the moment carried weight beyond ritual. It signaled resolve. His decision was firm, unmistakable, and final. William and Catherine did not claim authority. It was placed upon them publicly and without retreat. From that point on, their path was no longer conditional. History rarely announces its turning points. Sometimes it allows them to unfold quietly, then leaves people to realize what they witnessed only after the fact. By the time the nation fully understood, the transformation was complete. The crown had not been seized or contested. It had simply settled where it now belonged, leaving behind the tension of the past and stepping confidently into a future already in motion. So, what do you think this first appearance truly revealed about power, timing, and the future of the crown? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay glued.